There is a task you have been avoiding. You know exactly what it is. You have known for days, possibly weeks. It is on your list. It has been on your list long enough that seeing it there has stopped producing urgency and started producing something closer to a dull, familiar dread. And every day that you don't do it, the not doing of it accumulates. The guilt layering on top of the avoidance feeding the guilt, until the task has grown in your mind to something significantly larger and more threatening than it would have been if you had simply done it the first time it appeared on the list. In the story you tell yourself about this, the explanation you have been using for as long as this pattern has been present is probably some version of the same word: lazy. I want to offer you a different explanation. Not as reassurance, not as a reframe designed to make you feel better about an unfinished to-do list, as a clinical correction. Because the research on procrastination has, over the last 2 decades, converged on a finding that is both more specific and more actionable than the story most people are telling themselves about why they can't seem to begin. Procrastination is not a time management problem. It is not a motivation problem. It is not a problem of insufficient discipline or unclear goals or the wrong organizational system. It is an emotion regulation problem. Specifically, the habitual avoidance of the negative emotional states that certain tasks reliably produce through the substitution of easier, more immediately rewarding activities that make the feeling go away right now at the cost of everything that matters later. The procrastinator is not avoiding the task, they are avoiding how the task makes them feel. And until you understand what feelings are being avoided and why, no productivity system on Earth will produce lasting change, because you will keep solving the wrong problem. By the end of this video, you will understand the full psychological mechanism of procrastination, 6 specific dimensions grounded in the research of Dr. Piers Steel, Dr. Fuchsia Saras, and clinical psychologist Dr. Timothy Peichel. And you will have a set of targeted interventions that address the actual mechanism rather than its surface symptoms. Stay especially close when we reach Dimension 3, because Dimension 3 contains what is, according to the research, the single most counterintuitive finding in the entire psychology of procrastination, the one that is directly opposite to what most people do immediately after a procrastination episode, and whose opposite nature is precisely why it makes it so hard to apply and so powerful when you do. Stay with me to Dimension 3. What you understand there will change what you do in the 30 minutes after you read this. Dimension 1. What procrastination actually is, and why the standard definition is wrong. The popular definition of procrastination is the irrational delay of tasks, despite knowing that delay will make things worse. It is a useful starting point, but it stops short of the mechanism. It describes the behavior without explaining the function. Dr. Timothy Peichel at Carleton University, who has spent over 20 years studying procrastination and its psychological roots, defines it more precisely as the voluntary delay of an intended action, despite expecting to be worse off for the delay. Driven not by time mismanagement, but by the prioritization of short-term mood repair over long-term goal pursuit. That last phrase is the key: short-term mood repair. The procrastinating brain is not malfunctioning, it is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It has detected a negative emotional state, anxiety about the task, boredom, self-doubt, fear of failure, the diffuse unease of something that feels too big or too unclear or too personally threatening, and it has executed its primary directive: make the feeling stop. The phone, the snack, the suddenly urgent need to reorganize your desk, these are not failures of discipline. They are the nervous system's successful execution of an emotion regulation strategy. They work immediately, reliably, every time, at the precise scale the nervous system was optimizing for, which is right now and never later. Dimension 2. The 4 variables that determine how badly you will procrastinate and how to change them. In 2007, psychologist Dr. Piers Steel at the University of Calgary published what he called the procrastination equation, a formula derived from motivational psychology that identifies the 4 specific variables that determine how likely a person is to procrastinate on any given task. The first variable is expectancy, your belief that you can successfully complete the task. The lower your confidence in your ability to do it well, the higher your procrastination. This is why perfectionists procrastinate more than average, not less, because the gap between their standard and their estimated performance produces an anticipatory shame that the nervous system registers as danger before the task has even begun. The second variable is value, how rewarding the task is, intrinsically or instrumentally. Tasks that are boring, meaningless, or disconnected from anything the person cares about produce the negative emotional states that avoidance is designed to relieve. The third variable is impulsiveness, the individual's susceptibility to distraction and immediate reward. This is the variable most closely linked to neurological differences, particularly in individuals with ADHD, where the dopaminergic regulation of attention makes sustained engagement with low-stimulation tasks neurologically costly in a way that willpower is simply not designed to address. The fourth variable is delay, how far in the future the consequence or reward sits. The further the deadline, the lower the urgency the brain assigns, not because the person doesn't understand the timeline, but because the brain's reward system discounts future consequences at a rate that is biologically steeper than any calendar can compensate for. What Steele's equation reveals is that procrastination is not a single problem with a single solution. It is a multivariable system, and the intervention that works for one person may be entirely irrelevant for another, depending on which variable is driving their specific pattern. Dimension 3. Why self-criticism after procrastinating makes the next episode more likely, not less. This is the finding that changes everything for most people who hear it, and it runs directly counter to the instinct that almost every chronic procrastinator acts on immediately after a procrastination episode. The instinct is self-criticism, the internal monologue of what is wrong with you, why you always do this, how other people manage to function, what this says about your character and your prospects and your capacity to be trusted with your own life. And the logic behind this instinct feels sound. Surely the discomfort of self-criticism will motivate better behavior next time. Dr. Kristen Neff at the University of Texas, whose research on self-compassion is among the most cited in contemporary psychology, and Dr. Fuchsia Sorois at Durham University, whose work specifically examines self-compassion and procrastination, have found the opposite. Self-criticism after procrastinating increases the likelihood of procrastinating again. The mechanism is direct. Self-criticism is itself a source of negative emotional experience, and negative emotional experience, as we now understand, is exactly what the procrastination cycle is designed to relieve. The self-criticism produces shame. The shame produces the need for mood repair. The mood repair produces avoidance. The avoidance produces more self-criticism. Sorois's research found that procrastinators who responded to a procrastination episode with self-compassion, with the same understanding and patience they would offer a friend in the same situation, showed significantly lower procrastination in subsequent tasks than those who responded with self-criticism. Not because the self-compassion removed accountability, because it interrupted the shame cycle before the shame could become the next episode's primary trigger. If this is landing, if you are recognizing the loop you have been running and the thing that has been keeping it going, like this video right now, and write in the comments, "I am not lazy, I am avoiding a feeling." Because that reframe is not permission to keep avoiding, it is precision, the specific, honest identification of what is actually happening that makes it possible for the first time to intervene at the right level. Write it. I am not lazy, I am avoiding a feeling. Dimension 4. The emotions most commonly being avoided and why they attach to specific tasks. Not all tasks produce procrastination equally, and the specific tasks that produce the most avoidance in a given person are diagnostically revealing because the emotion being avoided is almost always consistent across the tasks that trigger it. Fear of failure is the most common. Tasks that carry personal significance, that feel like a test of intelligence, competence, worth, produce anticipatory anxiety proportional to how much the outcome matters. The more it matters, the more threatening the possibility of doing it badly, and the more powerfully the avoidance instinct is activated before a single word has been written or a single step has been taken. This is why the most important projects, the ones that would genuinely change things, that are most aligned with what the person actually wants, are often the ones that are avoided longest and most completely. Not because the person doesn't care about them, because they care so much that the risk of the task is proportional to the meaning it carries. Fear of success is less commonly discussed but clinically real. The avoidance of tasks that, if completed successfully, would produce consequences the person is not sure they can handle. Greater visibility, higher expectations, the loss of the excuse that things would be different if only they tried. The completion of the task would require the person to inhabit a version of themselves they are not yet certain they are entitled to be. And then there is boredom, which research by neuroscientist John Eastwood at York University shows is not the absence of stimulation, but the active, aversive experience of a mind that wants to engage and cannot find a way to do it. Boredom is not neutral. It is a negative emotional state with the same avoidance valence as anxiety or shame, and for high-stimulation brains, particularly those with ADHD-adjacent profiles, it may be the primary driver of procrastination above almost everything else. Dimension 5. Why deadlines work for some people and not others, the temporal motivation variable. The deadline is the most widely used intervention for procrastination in every institutional context that has ever tried to solve the problem. Schools, workplaces, creative industries, personal productivity systems, and for a significant portion of the population, it works. The mechanism is simple. By placing the consequence close in time, the deadline activates the urgency that the brain's reward system requires to make the task feel more immediately important than the avoidance. The approaching deadline is a threat, and threat, unlike abstract future consequence, registers in the amygdala as something that requires a response right now. But deadline-driven motivation has a specific profile. It works primarily for people whose procrastination is driven by low urgency, and primarily for tasks whose aversion level is moderate. For people whose procrastination is driven by anxiety or perfectionism, for whom the approaching deadline does not activate productive urgency, it activates paralysis. The person who waits until midnight the night before, who functions, in some narrow and miserable sense, under pressure, is not someone for whom deadlines are working well. They are someone for whom the deadline is the only stimulus powerful enough to override the avoidance, but who pays for every delivery in the specific, depleting cost of work produced under maximum stress with minimum time for the quality they actually wanted to produce. Dimension 6. 6 interventions that address the actual mechanism. The first is emotion identification before task initiation. Before you sit down to the avoided task, not during, not after, name specifically what you feel when you think about it. Not, I don't want to do it. The specific feeling, anxious, bored, ashamed, afraid of what it will reveal. Naming the emotion activates the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for regulation, and research by neuroscientist Matthew Lieberman at UCLA shows that affect labeling reduces amygdala activation measurably in real time before any other intervention is applied. The second is the 2-minute commitment, not to finish the task, but to begin it for 2 minutes. Research on task engagement consistently shows that the aversion to a task is almost always higher before initiation than during it, that the emotion being avoided is the anticipation of the task more than the task itself. 2 minutes is small enough to be non-threatening and long enough, in most cases, to shift the emotional state from avoidance to engagement. The third, and the one that requires the most practice, is post-procrastination self-compassion. the deliberate, specific replacement of self-criticism with the response you would offer a friend, not excusing the avoidance, interrupting the shame cycle before it becomes the next episode's emotional trigger. The fourth is environmental friction engineering, reducing the availability of the avoidance behavior rather than increasing willpower to resist it. If your procrastination vehicle is your phone, the phone goes in another room. Not because willpower can't resist it, but because willpower is a depletable resource and friction is a structural one, and structure consistently outperforms resolve in behavioral research. The fifth is implementation intentions, the research-backed practice developed by psychologist Peter Gollwitzer of pre-committing to a specific when-then plan. When I sit down at my desk at 9, then the first thing I open is the document. Not a goal, a script. Gollwitzer's research shows that implementation intentions reduce the decision-making load at the moment of initiation, which is precisely the moment when the avoidance instinct is most likely to win. And the sixth is meaning reconnection, the deliberate reactivation of why the task matters before engaging with how it needs to be done. Not motivation as a feeling to wait for, meaning as a cognitive anchor, a brief, explicit rehearsal of what completing this work connects to in a life that has things worth working toward. 6 dimensions. Procrastination as emotion regulation, the habitual avoidance of how a task makes you feel rather than the task itself. The 4 variables that determine avoidance likelihood and how to shift them. The counterintuitive finding that self-compassion after procrastinating reduces recurrence more reliably than self-criticism. The specific emotions, fear of failure, fear of success, boredom, that attach to specific tasks and reveal the actual target of the intervention. The truth about deadlines, who they help and who they harm. And 6 targeted tools that address the mechanism rather than the symptom, not because they make the work easier, but because they make the emotion manageable enough that the work can actually begin. You have not been failing to manage your time. You have been managing your emotions, imperfectly, automatically, in the only way your nervous system knew how, at a cost you are now familiar with and ready to stop paying. The task is still there. It will still require effort. It will still produce whatever emotion it has always produced, because the emotion is not going to disappear simply because you understand its mechanism. But understanding the mechanism means you no longer have to be ambushed by it. You can see it coming. You can name it before it steers you. You can sit with it for 2 minutes, for 5, for just long enough to discover again that the feeling you were avoiding was survivable all along. If this video gave you something real, share it with someone who has been calling themselves lazy when they are not. Subscribe to this channel because every week we go deep on the psychology of how your mind actually works, not how you've been taught to judge yourself for the ways it doesn't. The work is waiting. You are not lazy. You are human, and now you know exactly where to start.